Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. If something crazy happened at the debate, if there was something wild that was said, and I'm not talking about it right now, that's because this is a pre-recorded episode. I am currently flying back from the Blaze studio where I did live commentary about the debate. So if you want to get my thoughts on what happened there, you can go ahead and check that out on the Blaze. But today we're going to be talking about small government. We have this obsession, this ideological obsession with small government. We have the cult of small government when it comes to conservatives and libertarians. We need to limit government. We need to cut back, cut more out of the government. That's what everything is about. And we never really get an explanation as to why. There's usually some vague reference to freedom, but we never get a larger explanation of what this small government does for the community, why it matters, what kind of lives it enables people to live. And that's what I want to go into today because I think the ideological addiction to small government often blinds us to its actual value and why sometimes it's actually important to pass laws that make government smaller. Yes, by going ahead and enforcing certain laws through the government, we can actually reduce the power of government. But before we get to all that, guys, let me go ahead and tell you about today's sponsors. Hey, guys, I want to talk to you about a wonderful new movie from Angel Studios, Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot. It's inspired by the powerful true story of Bishop and First Lady Donna Martin and their tiny Bennett Chapel Church in the town of Possum Trot in the woods of East Texas. 22 families from a rural black church linked arms and courageously adopted 77 of the most difficult to place children in their local foster care system. By doing the impossible, the first 76 kids were adopted between 1998 and 2000, and another was adopted in 2011. This East Texas community proved that with real, determined love, the battle for America's most vulnerable can be won, as this act ignited a national movement for vulnerable children that continues to this day. The first step to ending the crisis is to raise awareness. I encourage you to order your tickets to see Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot, today at angel.com/Auron. That's angel.com/Auron. The fight for kids begins on July 4th when Sound of Hope opens in theaters. All right, so again, small government is the obsession, right? We have to go ahead and reduce the size and power of government at every opportunity because that's what conservatism is, or that's what it means to be right wing. We hear this all the time. This is the most important function of a conservative or a right winger to go ahead and push for this constant reduction in small government. Now, I'm going to go ahead and explain early on that this is not a screed against small government. I'm not here to lobby you for a vast government. That's not what I'm doing here. I think there are many virtues to a smaller government. But the key that I want to focus on is the virtues there, the things that this does for a community, the things that it allows people to do and be because the size of government is smaller. What I wanted to get us past is this ideological addiction that we just cut government at every opportunity. Because when we think about it this way, when we reduce everything to that very simple maxim of cut government no matter what, we end up missing what the actual purpose of a small government is. And sometimes it can lead us to making decisions that are actually detrimental to a smaller government by cutting certain aspects of restrictions that the government might apply. We go ahead and increase the overall power of government without realizing it. So that's what I want to get into today. So, first, what are some of the virtues of a small government? What does that actually do for people? I want us to remember that we are orienting ourselves with first the good of a people. We want to go ahead and make sure that that is what is driving us. We don't want a uniform ideology. We're not interested in going ahead and producing some thought experiment about the way governments or economies or anything else should be run. We're not here to prove which scientific theory is the most viable. That is not what is happening here. We are beginning with the good of a people, in this case, the American people. Hopefully, you have a more local people as well that you understand. You're working for their good, your community, your family, your region, your country. It is their good that you want first. And so by putting America or your state or your family or your community first, you can then start thinking about what principles or what application of government or any of these other things would be best for the people there. You are oriented for their good first, not for an ideology, not for a foreign policy, not for capitalism or socialism or any of these isms. I am thinking about the good of these people first. What do I want in my community? Why is small government advantageous to my community? Well, the reason that small government is advantageous to a community that is virtuous is that it allows them to pursue ordered liberty. It allows them to go ahead and exercise their virtue in accordance with the moral vision that the community understands. If you have a government that is constantly dictating every aspect of life, if you've had to go ahead and formalize every aspect of what people should be doing inside your society, they don't have a lot of liberty to pursue virtue. Now, maybe you've ordered every aspect of your society in a virtuous way. Maybe that's in treating them, teaching them virtue. Now, a lot of people would think that's authoritarian. Maybe it is. But ultimately, the problem with it is that it doesn't allow virtuous people to go ahead and, again, exercise that ordered liberty. Now, the ordered liberty requires you, of course, to have certain things about your community. The people in the community must be oriented towards a specific moral vision. They must have a shared understanding of what type of life they should be pursuing. Now, they have liberty inside their own decisions about how to best pursue it. But if you don't have a community that shares those values, you won't have a community for long. That's what makes a people, is that they have a shared history, a shared set of traditions and folkways, a shared religion, a shared understanding of who they should be. And if you have that, and you have the robust organic institutions that come along with that, then the government doesn't really need to do a whole lot because the people already have this shared moral vision. When you have a people who have organically created a culture, when they've grown together through many centuries of shared experience and shared moral goals and religion, language, these things, then you don't need to do a lot of top down manipulation to properly order your society. Alexis de Tocqueville recognized this in Democracy in America. He said the things that made America run was the voluntary institutions it created, the voluntary associations. So many Americans were rigorous in their involvement in civic life. They were constantly creating fraternities, fraternal organizations, churches, community organizations, merchant guilds, all these different things that allowed for this creation of social fabric, this shared help if you ended up in trouble through all these different organizations. There was a social safety net, but the government didn't have to create it because society had already created it. And there were lots of ways that you had to behave and should behave, but they were enforced at a communal level. There didn't have to be somebody running around, arresting everybody who made a mistake because ultimately the constant pressure of the community, the moral force of the community, the folkways and the traditions of the community all bound people in a specific way. And so all these different organizations and all these different beliefs and all this history all went ahead and bound people into a particular way of life. And so if you have a small government in this way, then you're allowing people to exercise their their ordered liberty inside of this social fabric. And the thing is to understand that these things are necessary for each other. You cannot have this ordered liberty, or rather, you cannot have the small government if you do not have this ordered liberty. Small government is something that is facilitated by a virtuous people, a people who share an understanding of who they are, how they're going, how they should conduct themselves, how to bring about the social good. These people who already have these ideas deeply ingrained, it's already very organic. They don't need a lot of formal institutions to go ahead and impose that on society because they impose it on themselves. They are self governed, not in the sense that each person does whatever they want. That's not what that means. And this is a problem that a lot of conservatives and libertarians have. They just think that means freedom. I just do whatever I want, whenever I want. That's what freedom is about. I just do anything and everything I please, without worrying about anyone else, and the government doesn't stop me. That is not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about this wild, unattached freedom, no duties, no responsibilities, no restrictions, no care for the community, no care for your impact on yourselves or the other. That is not what we're talking about here. An ordered liberty is one in which you are exercising your ability, your choice inside this framework, but it is the framework that is created, it is the virtue that allows for that. The small government can only exist because you are already limiting what you do. If you create a free society where everyone just gets hooked on heroin because they're free to do whatever they want, well, you're going to have a really crappy society. That's not a society that's going to be free for very long. You see, freedom in and of itself is not actually the good. It is the pursuit of the good that enables a liberty that you can practice inside that community. It's not the other way around. And so it's really important when we talk about this to recognize that the reason for small government is that you already have virtuous people. You already have a people who are capable of self-government, people who are capable of acting inside these bounds. But self-government is almost a misnomer because again, it's not just I do whatever I want for myself. It's not being selfish. You can self-govern really because you are community governed, because there is already this organic structure built into your society that does the vast majority of things that we think of that the state would do today. You already educate your own children. You already take care of your extended family. You already go ahead and participate in your church and make sure that the poor and others are taken care of through that organization. You already work through a fraternal organization to make sure that there's mutual aid if one of your friends or someone else you know is injured or falls sick or has some kind of fire or some other disaster befalls them. Like all of these communal organizations, all of this active virtue that you've built up, the social credit inside the community, that high trust that you have created allows for small government. All these other things create small government. Small government does not create those things. And this is always the problem, again, that libertarians and conservatives have so often. They confuse the causality. They think that small government creates virtuous people, that small government creates social fabric, that small government creates all of these organic institutions, but that's not the case. If you already have all those things, if you already have a high trust society with a lot of social fabric, with a lot of organizations that are organic to the community, you don't need the artificial power of a large overbearing state to step in and force people to behave in certain ways. You don't have to create a social safety net. You don't have to create a demand for certain behaviors because they already exist in that communal form. There's no need for the state to get involved and step in. So now I want to talk a little bit about how the government can get involved, how certain government interventions actually can create a smaller government. But before we get into that, guys, let me tell you about job stack. Hey guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, job stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what job stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program is designed by Ralph Haltza, the creator of Job Stacking, to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by employers. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their incomes. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 different jobs and went from making $5K a month to $15K a month. But job stacking isn't just about increasing incomes. It's also about helping our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he has used to pay off his personal and student debt and buy a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so that you can go ahead and get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now and book a call with Rolf today. All right. So, like I said, we're not here to talk about the virtues of just small government. We're not in it for the idea of limited government or small government for its own sake. The reason we care about small government is it allows the exercise of ordered liberty. If a society is already virtuous, that is the goal, is to create this virtuous society that takes care of itself, that has organic institutions, then we get a limited government. So it is important to understand what actually limits government. Again, a lot of conservatives and libertarians think it's just words on paper. We wrote it down, we made a law, we separated the powers, we made some amendments to the Constitution, and boom, government is limited. But anyone living in America in the year of our Lord 2024 knows that government is not actually limited. The government can go ahead and shut down your church. The government can shut down your business. The government can lock you in your house. The government can go ahead and allow people to riot in the streets, and you're not going to do anything about it. They know this, right? This is what government does. So what actually limits government? Because we know that government isn't always totalitarian. It doesn't always have complete power all the time. We don't always have a total state. So, what actually limits government? Why are we here? Why don't we have that limited government? How can we get it back? The key is opposing social spheres. It is not formal government restrictions. It's not, oh, I wrote it down on a piece of paper somewhere. There's a contract and it says so. The words on paper do not limit government. What limits government are opposing social forces. The government can only ask so much of people if people have to devote themselves to other forces in society. When you had to take care of your extended family, when you had a lot of kids because you didn't really have a choice because control wasn't really a thing, when you had to take care of your ailing parents because there wasn't really another option for that, it's not like you could just hand them off to some state nursing home. When you had to go ahead and take care of your deadbeat niece because there wasn't some welfare program that stepped in and take care of her and her kid. Like when you had all of these things, you had to be involved in a church because it was a key aspect of social life. It's how you found a husband or a wife. It's how you shared and taken care of the poor and other people in the community. When you had to be involved in all of these different organizations, that was very much a drain on all of your other resources. Now, all that sounds pretty exhausting to the average person, but this was just part of life through most of history. And because of this, government could not really make certain demands because government couldn't fill in all those responsibilities. You can only ask so much of somebody who has to support like 7 children and take care of his ailing mother and educate his children and go to church to make sure and fund that church and volunteer in that church to make sure that the poor and everybody else were taken care of. And he has to go to the merchant guild to make sure that, their prices are going to be set properly or that, whatever. Like his time is taken up, his money is taken up. He's paying tithes to the church. He's paying for his kids. He's all of his time is involved in these things. He cannot give everything to the state. The state can't make these vast demands on him because the state can't fill in all of those duties. But what has happened is we've handed over so much power to the state and we have given up so many of those duties that once exhausted us. We feel free, not because the state isn't any smaller, the state is actually much bigger and can make much bigger demands, but we feel free because we have lost all of those social obligations. But when we lost all those social obligations, we also destroyed all those opposing social spheres, spheres of community, spheres of family, spheres of the tribe, spheres of the church, spheres of the guilds, spheres of the fraternity. They're all gone. All of that is gone. And instead, there's just the state. And the state can make these vast demands on us. Now, that makes for a huge government, right? That creates large government. So that's not good, but it's not just not good because the government is large. It's not good because it leaves people without any of those critical connections. By handing all those duties over to the state, we might feel free in the moment, but we've lost our organic connection to meaning or organic connection to purpose. We no longer have that deeply woven social fabric that holds us in place, that creates those identities, that gives us meaning and purpose, that gives us a reason, that points us in a direction, connects us to our ancestors, connects us to those that will come after us. We've lost all of that. We are no longer in that great chain of being. We can no longer practice the ordered liberty that we talked about because we have stripped the virtue out of our communities by handing everything over to the state. The state has grown. We can no longer have limited government because we no longer have the virtuous communities that enabled it. So it's not that again, it's not that the small government was the goal. It's not that the small government is the thing that we are pursuing. It's that small government was something that came after we created these virtuous communities. It's something that is enabled because we had to create communities that could take care of themselves. There simply wasn't a vast, massive bureaucratic government that existed during colonial America. They had to go ahead and create these communities that could more or less take care of themselves. And that enabled small government because once the government did get formalized, there was already this organic set of community institutions, already this idea of who we are and where we're going and what kind of life we should achieve. That meant that we could keep government small. But that's not the case today. And so instead, government has exploded. So what can we do? What's another way to look at this to understand how social spheres can be kept intact? I want to talk to you today about blue laws. That's why I've got the closed on Sunday sign here. I want to talk to you about the utility of blue laws, why they existed, what they do for a community, and how the exercise of government power in the case of blue laws can actually protect alternative social spheres that push back against the power of the government. Before I do that, guys, let me tell you a little bit about ISI. Universities today aren't just neglecting real education, they're actively undermining it, and we can't let them get away with it. America was made for an educated and engaged citizenry. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute is here to help. ISI offers programs and opportunities for conservative students across the country. ISI understands that conservatives and right of center students feel isolated on college campuses and that you're often fighting for your own reputation, dignity, and future. Through ISI, you can learn about what Russell Kirk called the permanent things, the philosophical and political teachings that shaped and made Western civilization great. ISI offers many opportunities to jumpstart your career. They have fellowships at some of the nation's top conservative publications like National Review, The American Conservative, and The College Thinker. If you're a graduate student, ISI offers funding opportunities to sponsor the next great generation of college professors. Through ISI, you can work with conservative thinkers who are making a difference. Thinkers like Chris Rufo, who currently has an ISI researcher helping him with his book. But perhaps most importantly, ISI offers college students a community of people that can help them grow. If you're a college student, ISI can help you start a student organization or a student newspaper or meet other like-minded students at their various conferences and events. ISI is here to educate the next generation of great Americans. To learn more, go to isi.org. That's isi.org. All right, so small government, right? Again, the point is we don't want to just worship small government. We want to understand why it's valuable, what goods it enables, right? We're looking for the good of our community, and if small government brings about the good of our community, then that's great. But if it doesn't, then we need to think about why, and we need to understand what we're actually looking for in our community. We're orienting ourselves towards a good life for the people who live in our community, not just for some abstract ideological value of small government. Now, again, I am generally pro a small government. I think that ultimately having a massive totalitarian, overbearing, bureaucratic state is not good for people. However, I think it's bad for people because it keeps them from developing this ordered liberty in these virtuous communities. Not because I have some kind of ideological purity test when it comes to small government. So when people say, Auron, are you for small government? The answer is kind of, sometimes, right? It depends. So for instance, why don't I just declare myself a champion of small government? What's one way in which I actually think that small government is a problem, not a solution? So one thing that I think is very valuable are blue laws. Now, for those who are not familiar, that there's still a few places where this is hanging around, but most of the remnants have kind of been destroyed over time. Blue laws were laws on the books that restricted what could happen on Sunday, usually, because Sunday is, of course, the most common day of worship for Christians. There are some that do it on Saturday, but Sunday is generally thought of as the primary day of worship for Christians. It is the Sabbath. These are Sabbath laws. Now, there are different levels of blue laws. There have been blue laws that completely shut down everything on Sunday. Nothing is open, nothing is allowed. Everybody just has to go to church, go home. That's it. There are some blue laws that allow for specific critical things to be open, things like gas stations or grocery stores, things where if you didn't do the shopping the day before, then you might be stuck without something vital. Now, to be clear, a lot of blue laws didn't allow this at all. They're like, well, tough. You should have gone to the store the day before, get your grocery store shopping done on Saturday, fill up the gas tank on Saturday. Don't don't bank on it being open on Sunday. Blue law says that they're closed. However, there are some that have allowed those. There are other blue laws that only restrict things like, say, alcohol or other vice type stuff. They reduce the amount of things, for instance, they would close movie theaters specifically on Sundays to keep people from going out, going to distractions, instead making sure that they're going to church, spending time with their families, these kind of things. So a blue law, if you're a strict small government guy, a blue law is terrible, right? This is the worst thing imaginable. It's the government telling people how to live their lives, how to run their business, how to go ahead and spend their Sunday. You are taking a religious dictate and you are building it into your legal code. In fact, many so-called Christians today would be against this because this is establishment of church and state. This is woke. This is the woke right here, right? They're telling you that the government should enforce some kind of religious idea onto the people. Yes, that is actually exactly what we're doing here. To be very clear, that is the purpose of this. So what is the value of a blue law? Since I'm not a small government guy, and I think that there is a value in the government setting a norm, what is the value of the blue law? So the blue law protects a sphere of society. It says we understand that the vast majority of people here are Christian. And because the vast majority of people here are Christian, Sunday is their holy day, their Sabbath. And that means that most people who are Christian are going to want to not be working. So they need the day off because they're not supposed to be working on Sunday. Also, they're going to want to be going to church. And if they have to work, then they can't go to church. So not just the violation of the working on Sunday, but the inability to go to church because they have to work. And if we leave all these things open, this will create a distraction. That means more people will want to go to the movie, or there's an extra day to get errands done, or there's something else to do besides church and spending time with your family. And so all of this will destroy the general understanding that we should be spending Sabbath with our families, going to church and not working. Like the fact that all these things are open and available will distract people, will keep them from doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we're just going to pass a law that says all this stuff should be closed. We're just not going to do any of it. We're not going to allow any of it. And that way, there isn't an opportunity for people to exploit this, to work around it. We're just going to shut it all down. Now, again, to a small government person, so a person who's just ideologically for small government, this sounds terrible. I can't believe the government is telling people what to do with their business. Can't believe the government is promoting religion. I can't believe the government is telling people what to do with their free time. All of this is horrible. However, if you understand this properly, you will recognize that blue laws actually reduce the power of government. In fact, government has grown as blue laws have shrunk in the United States. So let's think about this for a minute. What does a blue law do? Well, first, a blue law is formalizing, hopefully, what is already a normal thing inside your community. So, to be clear, as so often is the case, if there is not an organic support for a way of being, the law in and of itself can have a difficult time enforcing it. Now, this is not to say that laws cannot change minds. I'm a strong believer that the law can be a teacher, and that so many of the cultural changes that we have had in the United States are a result of law happening first and then the culture following the law. Things like gay marriage, things like abortion, all these things are coming from the fact that the law changed first and then everything followed it, not the other way around. These things were not popular and then we got a law enshrining them. They were law and then people followed them. With the blue law, however, you would hope that if you are a Christian society and this is how people are living, then all the blue law is doing is formalizing what people already know. In an ideal society, again, with the proper amount of small government because you already have a virtuous community, blue laws are unnecessary. Somebody who opened their store on Sunday would be reviled. Somebody who's operating, some kind of uh, merchant, business at this time would be considered terrible for violating the Sabbath. That people would expect you to be at church, and if you didn't come to church, people would notice because your community would be one that's closely knit, and people would say, "Hey, why isn't this person attending?" All of these things would be self-enforcing. Now, again, that might sound terrifying to modern people. They might tend to say to themselves, "Well, this sounds horrible. I wouldn't want to live in that." Well, fine, but I want you to understand this is what keeps you from having a larger government. When you have this level of social accountability, when you have these organic structures and expectations inside your society, this is what keeps people from needing a large state, a total state to take over and dictate these things to them. All right, so how does a blue law restrict the growth of the state? There is always the slippery slope. The slippery slope is not some kind of fallacy. It's not some kind of logical error. Slippery slope is an observable fact. Once you start letting people take one step towards uh, removing a norm, they will take the next step and the next step and the next step. Once you go ahead and start pulling away some of those restrictions, once you go ahead and chip away at this shared idea, over time, people will move more and more towards the complete abolition of that restriction of that idea, and they'll forget why they even practiced it in the first place. So the Sabbath is important for a lot of reasons. The Sabbath is religious. That part is really important. But it also provides a day off for people that is shared. That means everybody does it. Everybody knows you're going to be home. Everybody can involve themselves in these communal activities because there's always a day where everybody won't be at work, which is critical. It also creates a limitation on the marketplace. When you have a day that is set aside where no one can trade, no one can buy and sell, you're making a statement about the priorities of your community. Priorities of my community are not commodification. The priorities of my community are not making money. Priorities of my community are not avarice at all costs. There is a day we set aside to make sure that people can be with their families, they can take care of themselves, they can worship God. We are setting aside a part of our day, our week, a weekly rhythm, a cycle of life that goes ahead and protects people from this constant grind of the market. And that's really critical because if you don't have that, then there's always an opportunity to make a little more. And we can see what has happened here, right? You open up the blue law. First, the blue law says there's nothing open, right? Just nothing open. Get your gas, get your groceries on Saturday because Sunday everything's closed, right? That's how things start. And then someone says, "Well, what if would it be good if we just at least had the gas and the grocery stores open? What if there's an emergency? What if someone's driving through town and they run out of gas, they can't get any? What if someone runs out of food or something happens, there's an emergency, they don't have it." Now, the correct answer, right, if you have a real community is, well, if someone's like refrigerator died and they didn't have any food, we would take them food. You would need to open a grocery store on Sunday. If there's an emergency where someone needs gas, we'll siphon it out of someone's tank if we need to. Or I've got an extra can in the garage for my lawnmower. You can use it, right? If you have a community that's looking out for each other, then these emergencies aren't solved by the marketplace. They're solved by your neighbor. They're solved by your church. They're solved by your family members. That's how they get solved. You're not reliant on the marketplace to go ahead and mediate every problem. You have other resources, you have social resources that allow you to do that. But once you open up yourself to the idea that every individual should be able to solve this problem inside a market transaction, that they should need friends, they should need family, they should need community, they should need a church. Well, you create this scenario where the market is there to solve everything, but also where the reliance on all those other social spheres goes down. So when there's a reliance on the church or a reliance on the family, a reliance on your neighbor, then the government is not the be all end all. The market is not the be all end all. But when you no longer have to rely on those things, when there's always a market option or there's always a government option, then those spheres start to lose their power. And that means they also lose the ability to restrict the government. Because if you are not reliant on those spheres, you will be reliant somewhere else. That's the key. You are always reliant on someone or something. None of us are completely individualistic. None of us are completely unconnected. We all rely on something. And if it's not your community, if it's not people, it will be the state. And the market is, and often in many cases, the driver that enables the state to take over those spheres. Because once you get rid of some of those restrictions, then the next one comes, right? So, okay, the grocery stores are open, the gas stations are open. Well, if we're already open for the grocery store and the gas station, then why can't these other businesses operate? The grocery store is selling things I sell, and it gets an advantage just because it's a grocery store. The gas station is selling things I sell, but it gets an advantage just because it's a gas station. And so my store needs to be open too. Otherwise, they're getting the opportunity. Oh well, then if every retail business is open, why not entertainment options? Why not my movie theater? Why not my restaurant? Why do all these things have to be closed too? And all of a sudden, we have this slippery slope where one thing opens and the next thing opens and the next thing opens. And now to stay competitive, everybody needs to open. And so now everybody has to be open on Sundays. Now all of these people who used to be able to go to church have to go to work because they have to fill these spots. You have to generate business because remember, it's not enough to just be open, especially in the mass consumption, uh, mass production, mass consumption economy. You have to constantly schedule the amount of consumption that's going to happen. So it's not just enough to be open. You have to advertise. You have to drive people to the store so you can justify being open on Sunday all the time. You have to demand people's presence there. All of a sudden, this sphere of sovereignty, this social sphere that was the church, that was faith, that was family, that was all set aside inside that Sunday is gone. And so, yeah, we got rid of a government restriction. We created smaller government by going ahead and getting rid of blue laws. The government's not restricting my purchases. They're not telling me when my business can be open. The government is no longer putting their thumb on the scale. They're no longer reaching to my life in that aspect. But because there's no formal ban on this action, all of the social mores suddenly wear away. And all of a sudden, you have this scenario where these social spheres that used to wield a large amount of power because there were certain areas of life where people were dependent on them, where they mediated the problems of society. Instead, all of that current gets turned over to the market. And anytime the market fails, and this is a really important thing to grasp, okay? Anytime the market fails, the government steps in. This is, again, really important for conservatives, people who call themselves conservative or right wing, to understand. Anytime the market fails, the government steps in. And if you don't think that that's the case, just look at, I don't know, the banks getting bailed out, right? Like anytime there's a loser in the market, you can't just leave people losing in the market forever. So what we end up doing is covering over all of those gaps in the market with the government. The government backstops all of these interactions. So instead of the church, instead of the family, instead of the community, the fraternal organization, the guild, all of these things covering the mutual aid that is necessary there, instead it all gets moved over to the government. And so by destroying that sphere of sovereignty, by going ahead and shutting down that one day of rest where the market was not in charge and you had to rely on people and you had to go to church and you had to spend time with your family because there's nothing else to do. You can't go to the movies, you can't go golfing, you can't go do whatever. The only thing there is to do is spend time with God and spend time with your family. And that's everyone's going to be available. And you don't have to worry about scheduling. You don't have to figure out, who's working what shifts or anything because everyone is off simultaneously because you no longer have that. Government does not get smaller, it gets bigger. You got rid of a blue law. Yeah, you got rid of a restriction on the books. You got small government in one sense, but your small government enabled the explosion of government on the other end. And that's what I want us to think about. Blue laws are just one example, but I think it's a good example to show us moments when actually building in some protection of the other social spheres, going ahead and formalizing protection of our way of life helps to prevent the eventual growth of government. By recognizing what actually restricts government, which is not laws on paper, but is the opposing social sphere, we can recognize that maybe some laws on paper might actually help us to preserve the social spheres that keep government small. Because once we lost the sacredness of Sunday, once we lost the Sabbath, once we lost the day that made people dependent on the church and the family and the community, once we lost the day that made that holy and made that something that we all respected and shared, whether you were a Christian or not, you still understood that this is how your society was going to function and this is how you were going to live the rhythm of your life. Once we lost that, government explodes because government covers all of these things that used to be covered by the social spheres. And also, we lose our shared identity as people because we no longer have those rituals. Again, whether you are a personal believer or not, there are all these stories of people who didn't believe in God, but moved to this area where there's a small church. And that's the only place where they can have community. And so they start going to small church, and lo and behold, they become Christians because once they have been in it, once they have acted inside of it, they recognize the truth of it. Once they have involved themselves in this day to day life of believers, they absorb it in a way that they never would have intellectually. But that can only happen when you have certain things that are dependent on that. Those people don't just go to church because they feel like it. They were atheists. They go to church because that was the only place where they could find the community. And if you don't create that space, if you don't carve out that sacred space for families and churches and other communal organizations, if you don't set that outside of the market, then the government does not shrink. You didn't create small government by knocking down that regulation. You exploded the size of government. So that's what I want us thinking more about again is just this idea of how we can protect these social spheres, how we can understand ourselves as being oriented towards the good of our community, and understanding the good of our community may involve small government, but small government is not the goal of our community. If small government facilitates a better community, then we should do that. And if there are things that we can do, laws we can pass, ways that we can restrict things that will empower those social spheres that keep government small, then we should do that. Even if it feels like an oxymoron at the moment, even if it's like, oh, granting the government the power to regulate this business, how can that be small government? It can be in the long run if that is otherwise protecting these social spheres that push back against the ultimate power of government. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank you so much for watching. I will, of course, be back live on Monday, but I hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded one. I hope the debate was very exciting. I'm sure there are a lot of hilarious moments because, of course, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are on stage. If this is your first time on the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. Turn on the notifications and the bell so you can go ahead and watch the streams when I'm live and not pre-recorded. If you'd like to go ahead and get this broadcast as a podcast, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And of course, if you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, you can do that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or order it at your favorite local bookstore. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And as always, I will talk to you next time.